Scott Ritzheimer is a business strategist that guides businesses and startups to achieve growth. With a track record of scaling businesses to 7- and 8-figure valuations, Scott has become a trusted advisor for entrepreneurs aiming to grow their businesses. In this episode, you will learn the steps Scott took to reach an 8-figure valuation for his company, the common challenges founders face when scaling from 6 to 7 figures and 7 to 8 figures, and the concept of the founder's evolution. Scott also shares insights on leadership transitions, managing time and energy, overcoming self-limiting factors, and ensuring long-term success. You'll learn strategies for predictable success, the balance between innovation and scalability, the importance of culture, and Scott's vision for the future of entrepreneurship.
My dad actually built our house when I was 11, 12, 13, and kind of forever. He's constantly been building it ever since. But like the bulk of the work was done in my preteen years. And I remember at the time I had to help him with like everything. We were plumbing, we were wiring, we were framing the whole thing. And I wanted to be riding dirt bikes with my friends, but I had two problems. One, I was working with him, and two, I didn't have any money. So, and I didn't have a dirt bike. So my very first kind of business transaction was talking my dad into paying me a stipend for some of the work that I was doing with him. So here in the US, we use this fiberglass insulation that has paper on one side. And it's a miserable job because the fiberglass gets in your skin and it's terrible. So my dad probably got the better end of this deal, but I talked him into paying me $1 per bay of insulation. I saved it all up and had just enough to go out and buy a 1970 Bridgestone 100. The thing, I was probably 125 pounds soaking wet at the time, and the bike itself weighed about 300 pounds. Solid steel frame, it's just ridiculous. But it was freedom for me, right? It was that first taste of like, I can just get on the bike and go. And I absolutely loved it. It was a really cool experience. And it was my first I can set my mind to something, and there was a financial piece to that, right? Because I'd done sports and everything. Second business, which is a little bit more formal, a couple of years later, I'd gotten the taste of this by now. And a friend of my dad's had a doctor's office that needed mowing. And so somehow I got recommended for the job, and I ended up going out there, and during the summer, every week I'd go out and mow, and we rebuilt a retaining wall there. We did all the landscaping, and the whole big idea behind this is how lofty my thought process was at the time. I remember I wanted to buy a Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti Virgin electric guitar. That was the whole big impetus behind it. I remember doing the math one day. It's like $50 a week. Okay, 40 weeks and I can get this thing, or whatever it was. I don't even remember what the math was, but I found out pretty quickly that it doesn't quite work that way. You got to pay for gas, and you got to pay for supplies and the mower and all of that kind of stuff. So the tragedy of this story is I never actually got the Paul Reed Smith Mark Tremonti edition of the guitar, but I learned a lot. I actually learned an enormous amount about running a business. My dad would make me do all the invoices. We had to price out jobs that we had never done before. If we got the pricing wrong, we were going to lose a ton of money. If we got it right, we're going to make a ton of money. So it's just a really cool experience that my dad created for me, and gave me enough room to learn from that. But he was also right there with me. If I got behind on a schedule or something, he'd come and cut it with me. It was just this really cool experience that I had with him. So those are my first two kind of forays into the world of entrepreneurism. Both, my dad was a big component of it, and he actually went on a couple right around the same time of starting his own business. So I got to see entrepreneurism in the real world as well.
Yeah, I feel like most people, when they come to be an entrepreneur, it's like out of kind of situational circumstance. But for you, you were almost born and bred as an entrepreneur because you had these goals that you wanted to get, such as your dirt bike and your electric guitar. And you're like, right, okay, I have no money. How can I make money? Oh, dad will give me money if I do this and I do that. So you're kind of always thinking of a way to make money, and your way to make money was through your dad. Now, obviously, in your adult life or later in life, I'm sure you kind of parted ways entrepreneurially with your dad and decided like, hey, I think I can go out and do this on my own. What was the kind of things you were looking at, and how did you come up with the ideas of what businesses you could do and what you could run and that type of thing?
Yeah, it's fascinating because in hindsight, that's very clear, isn't it? Right? Like that entrepreneurial wiring is there. But I never really considered myself an entrepreneur. I was never the guy like selling candy on the playground. You know, I had a couple of things. I set myself to them. I always had money as a kid, but I never really considered myself an entrepreneur. In fact, I was almost going to go into ministry. And so I'm ending up, kind of fast forward a few years, it's 2006. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so about 700 miles from my family, up in Pennsylvania, and I got to get a job. And so I was just any job I could. I had just gotten married. We had just moved to Atlanta. Didn't really know anybody but a couple people and had to make ends meet. So my wife and I actually both get a job at this place owned by a local guy who was just kind to us and gave us jobs. And about 3 months after we started working for him, he actually sold the business. It was about $1.5 million business at the time, and he sold it to another small business out of Tennessee. And I watched as the new owners who had gotten owner financing from the original owner, right? So everyone stayed involved in this. It was a messy situation, but I watched them systematically but unintentionally destroy the company. It was one of the more painful processes of my life. And I was the low man on the totem pole, right? Like I was getting paid almost minimum wage, working just over part-time hours as I was exploring other things. But it just hit so hard, the reality of the situation, the cost of getting it wrong for everyone involved. Nobody won. It wasn't like the new owners were ripping off the old owner. It wasn't like the old owner lied to the new. There's no villain in the story, but there was a tragedy. And so, again, about 18 months, systematically but unintentionally destroyed. They end up calling the old owner and saying to him, we went from 13 employees to 2.5. I was the half. And they call the owner and say, hey, we've done everything we can do. Not only is this company not working, it's threatening our other company. We've got to declare bankruptcy or do something. So if you want what's left of the company, you can have it. You've got 24 hours. Now, what's left of the company was basically 3 semi-working computers and one of those office chairs that all the padding had worn out of the bottom, you know, so it's like sitting right on plastic. That was it. That was all that was left. But those are symbols of, but we can take that and turn it into something. So he said, yes, absolutely, I'm going to do it. Jumps in a U-Haul, heads up to Tennessee. And while he's driving, he calls me and says, Scott, you know, this is what happened. They're going to declare bankruptcy. I think I can do it again, but I'll only do it if you help me. Will you come on as an owner and help me relaunch this thing? And that's actually my kind of official start into entrepreneurism. Was my part-time job turned into being a part owner in this company. Now, this is September 2008. Not a great time to start a business. The first 6 months we were in business, stock market fell 32 points or something like that. And it was that kind of classic entrepreneurial story. We were working out of his basement. We were getting letters from the HOA. We had people who couldn't pay. The economy's tanking. And we've got to find a way to make it happen. There was no plan B for either of us. And we did. We made it happen. And it set us on this trajectory of growth that was, I always want to be careful to say, it wasn't easy, right? There are a lot of really significant challenges, but when you look at, especially from a numbers perspective, we're doing 30, 50, 70% growth year over year for about 10 years. And it was a whole lot of fun. Looking back on it now, I actually wish that I had more fun in the process.
Mm. And was this the business that you were able to scale to an 8-figure valuation, or was this another business that you were able to scale to the 8-figure valuation?
It is, but there was another pretty big challenge that we had to face before we could get to that point. So Again, about 10 years of growth, somewhere in that ballpark. In the last couple of years of that, our top line was going up. We're getting $6, $7, $8 million a year, but our bottom line just started to collapse on itself. We went from kind of healthy 20-something margins to all the way down 1 year to 7%. It was like 7.35% or something like that, which is wonderful when it's off of several $million, but it's not a sustainable value, especially not in the industry that we were in. And what was particularly challenging about it is we had no idea what to do about it. We had tried for the last 3 years to turn it around, and it kept getting worse. And I remember just feeling beat up by it. And while the profit in and of itself is not a terrible thing, what that represents in terms of the failure that it was for us, the challenge that represents in when you're leading a winning organization and it's generally going good and you're generally growing, it's a lot of fun. It's pretty easy to get along. But when stuff starts to happen that's not what you want, and that's when the differences of opinion start showing up, the differences of perspective, that's where we start fighting with each other. The interpersonal conflict that we had, largely in part because things were going wrong and we couldn't figure out how to fix it, was one of the more painful experiences of my life. And I would say it easily trumped the challenges in those early days. And that was really hard for me. I'm 20 something at the time, I was maybe even early 30s. And I didn't, is this what it is? Like, is this what leading a business is all about? Because I understood why it was really hard at the beginning. I don't understand why it's so hard now. How do we go through all these years where things work so well and then feel like we're just running into a wall and we can't even see it? What in the world is going on? And I was really burned out by it, right? I was really disillusioned by it. I started to question myself. I definitely questioned my team. I even questioned our industry. Is this something that can really happen, right? It's just everything that I thought I knew was kind of, again, systematically getting destroyed. Like I thought I was in control and I really wasn't. So it's about this time, I'm listening to a podcast, something like this, and a gentleman comes on and talks about one of the most boring concepts you could ever come up with, but he had an Irish accent, and I think it was just enough to keep me focused. The novelty of a sweet Irish accent. The gentleman's name is Les McEwen. He's a dear friend and colleague of mine now, but he's talking about this idea of business life cycle stages, right? Almost fall asleep saying it right now, but as he's talking about it, he's putting this light on it that, number one, it's like he's been watching us every step of the way, right? As he's describing the first stage and the second stage of growth, it's like, man, did this guy have a camera in our office? And as he starts describing this third stage that organizations go through, it was like, not only does he have a camera in our office, I swear he's reading our emails. Like, how could he possibly know all of this? He knew about the profit challenges that we were facing. He knew about the infighting. He knew about the challenges my partner and I were facing with each other as to the direction of the company. He knew about the complexity that we were dealing with, the constant need to firefight. And as I'm listening to this podcast, like mouth wide open, like what in the world is going on? It was the very first time that I ever felt like my business was on a map. It was the very first time that I felt like I wasn't actually forging new territory. I was following in somebody's footsteps. And that was a profound revelation for me, because prior to that, again, being young and dumb and working in an industry where we didn't have any direct competitors. We had created something from nothing. And in doing that, it was easy to kind of look around and say, nobody gets this. Nobody understands it. Only us, only we can figure it out. And that's great until you can't figure it out. And now it's like, well, now who's going to figure it out? But in listening to him talk and later getting his book and walking through the steps, it gave us that hope that we weren't a lost cause, that the future wasn't some mysterious black hole. It was actually a stage that he calls predictable success. And the route to it wasn't just make it up as you go, or a post and hope, as some will say, or spray and pray, all of those different metaphors that we use. It wasn't any of that. It was a clearly lit path that we could follow step to step to step. Close the story out. We follow the steps in his book. Has a massive transformation on our business. We triple our bottom line in a single year. We shut down about $1.5 million business line, more than recoup that, added another, it was between 10 and 15% to our top line. We went another year, added another 5 percentage points to our profit. The next year, another 5 percentage points. We built an executive team. There was life in the organization again. There was this renewed sense of vision and capacity to actually pursue it. It was just an unbelievable, it's like, as I describe it now, it sounds like I'm lying, right? It sounds like it's too good to be true. And it's not that it was perfect, but the difference between what it was and what it became, I thought was a once in a forever thing, right? I thought we were the only one that experienced that type of a transformation. Now I see it on almost a daily basis with the clients that I work with. But for me, that transformation was not just a business thing. It transformed me as well. Transformed how I see business, what I thought success was. And it gave me a clarity that I had never really had about how I was wired and what my A seat actually was. And it wasn't running that company anymore. And it's ultimately what led me into coaching and consulting, what I do now.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to think that, going from 6 to 7 figures is really easy, but it's actually, the scale is completely different. Of 0 to 7 figures is a bloody hard way to go. And then say 7 to 8 figures, or, going from 1 million to 2 million to 3 million, that becomes so easy, but you also have to kind of compensate for the idea of, okay, maybe my profit margins are going down as I'm doing more scale. Okay, I might have to make a loss this year in order to make a profit next year. But they don't see these things coming because they don't plan for them. And one thing you touched on there was the idea of predictable success. So I wonder if you can kind of talk to me about the idea of predictable success and where you see that in people's businesses.
Yeah. So predictable success means something very specific to us. It's actually the name of a stage of business growth. It's actually the peak stage in any organization's life cycle, at the top of the arc, if you will. And it's defined by two things. One is the ability to scale. So it's where we can say, hey, we are maybe a local player to a regional superstar, or we're a regional player to a national superstar, where we can scale up a level. That happens in predictable success. It really only happens in predictable success, at least consistently over time. So it's the ability to scale, really, really cool, whole lot of fun. But more than that, it is a set of tensions that we as a leadership team need to embrace. What do I mean by that? You cannot achieve scalability through innovation alone. You have to be innovative and systematic. You can't achieve scalability through initiative alone. Yes, you've got to get out there and get stuff done, but you've also got to look not just at what needs to get done, but how can we do it again and again and again. You need to take risks, and you need to say no to risks. And it's this set of paradoxes or competing kind of priorities that leadership teams have to hang on to. And when you do, again, that's what creates that ability to scale. It also creates a freedom for each of the leaders in the organization to bring their very best. Right? They don't have to try to be someone else with a different leadership style. In fact, when they do, it's going to lead us astray one way or the other. But when each of us shows up with our skill set in predictable success, that's what continues to create that ability to continually set and meet or exceed our goals, to have a clear vision and actually make tangible progress toward it year in and year out.
And the person who kind of is at the start of this success plan is not always the person who's going to see it through or be there once, things have transitioned to where they transitioned to. So I wonder if you can kind of talk me through the idea of a founder moving through the business and where they kind of sit and how they can grow their business without hindering the growth by saying, oh, I always have to be the person at the top, or I have to always be in charge of this specific part because I enjoy this part most. How does a founder transition and stay aware of the fact that they might not be the best person to scale and grow their business, as well as the right person to help it go in that direction?
Yeah. Sam, you're a sharp guy. In about 3 minutes, you figured out what took me about 3 years to figure out, but maybe even 13, depending on how you look at it. You're 100% right. No business can sustainably exceed the growth rate of its most senior executive, right? So whether that's founder, CEO, president, chief pontiff, I don't care what your title is, but whoever that top person is, they have to grow as well. Right? They have to overcome some personal challenges, some professional challenges. And what it means to be CEO throughout the course of an organization's life cycle is fundamentally different from stage to stage. If you're in a brand new startup and you're trying to be CEO, your startup is almost guaranteed to fail. But if you're in a predictable success organization and you're still trying to play the founder card, I'm the founder, I'm the owner, do what I tell you to do, you're not going to be in predictable success long. So it's reasonably simple, especially when we kind of put the two ends of the spectrum there, it's reasonably simple to kind of mentally assent to how we have to show up over time is different. Maybe even who it takes to lead over time is different. But how do we actually navigate that journey? Right? It's one thing to say LA is here, Chicago is here. They're different places. But how do you actually get from LA to Chicago? Where do you need to stop along the way? What obstacles will you have to overcome? What terrain will you encounter? And so as I'm working to help organizations get through predictable success, I'm starting to kind of replay my own experiences over time. I've actually had the opportunity to help about 20,000 organizations start. So I've seen this happen a whole lot. And I start looking at the patterns of the personal behavior of the founder, the CEO, the president, the most senior executive. And I started to recognize there's a pattern. And this pattern is really important because it addresses a couple of really big questions, one of which you brought up, and that is who can take an organization from one level to the next, right? And there's lots of iterations of that question. I want to specifically dial in on one of the more hotly debated, which is founders, right? Can founders scale businesses outside of like the superstars like Elon Musk or Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, Elon didn't found most of his businesses, but that's another thing for another time. Can founders scale businesses? If you are a founder who feels like I did in that state of, I don't know if I have what it takes, is the solution really to bring somebody else in? And if so, how do you know who to bring in? How do you know that they actually have what it takes? And I would say my experience with that has been that that's the wrong question to ask. It's not so much who is necessary to do it, it's how do they need to show up? So here's what I mean by that. Usually this is happening several years into the process. We're hitting some kind of a glass ceiling. And as founders, we're starting to question, I've tried everything I know to try. This isn't working. What do I do? The thing that's going on is not that you are fundamentally disqualified from scaling a business. It's not that you are irrevocably kind of limited in your ability. What's happening is that you are holding on too tightly to the strategies of the past. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, they worked. At some point in time, and probably for quite an extended period of time, they worked really well, right? Things like picking the company up, putting it on your shoulders, and just fighting forward to the next thing. Things like jumping in and making sales calls whenever sales are down. Those heroic acts that we do to save the day, you have to do that to survive in a small business. So we're not talking about bad things. We're talking about things that were necessary for our success, but aren't serving us as well anymore. The second thing that comes into this, and this is, they go together, and that is that the boundary line between those two is invisible. There's nothing that actually clearly demarcates, hey, you've crossed a boundary and you have to start behaving differently, right? For founders, this whole journey is invisible. There are 7 distinct transformations that happen, and not one of them is visible from the outside. They are all internal and invisible. I want to contrast that just briefly to kind of illustrate my point with the leadership journey of an employee, for example. Employees who do a great job, get recognized by management, get an opportunity to step up into a project lead or a team lead role, right? And usually that comes with at least a conversation, maybe a title change, hopefully a pay raise, right? There is this external validation that a shift has made from being an individual contributor, a star player, to being what I call captain on the field. And there are industries worth and books and coaches who dedicate themselves to that one transition for employees. It's a hard transition to make, but the employee has the advantage of knowing that the transition has happened. When does that same transition happen for a founder? Right? Is it when you hire your first employee or your 15th, or is it somewhere in between? There's no distinct point where someone comes to you and says, hey, you're not just a founder anymore, you're a founder and a manager. And the third aspect of this is we just don't know what the road ahead is. We don't even know what's required of us moving forward. And so a lot of times when I hear folks kind of asking the question, do I have what it takes to move my organization forward? That's a really clear sign that we actually have to stop and take a new look at what does it actually mean to move forward. Here's the beautiful thing, Sam. I have found that far more founders are far more capable of scaling than not. In fact, a couple of gentlemen from Bain and Company did a study on this. They published it in a book called The Founder's Mentality. And they looked at it and said, being a founder or not being a founder is not predictive of future success. But what is predictive of future success is whether or not the CEO has a founder's mentality. And so founders actually have a distinct edge in that they had to build that mentality already. So if all they need to do is shift their mindset to move from being that kind of, either the player on the field or the captain on the field or even the coach on the sideline, they need to step out of the game, step up into the proverbial box, if you will, and become the chief executive that their company needs.
Mm. And what are some of the kind of limiting beliefs you see from these founders? Because you mentioned a whole bunch of things about finding out you're the right person or finding the right person with that founder's mindset. But there's also this idea that the person has these limiting beliefs, which also kind of limit their ability to scale and grow their business.
There's a couple of really, really big ones. And I'm not going to go super inward because a lot of my work touches on that. But I want to talk about how these show up in a business context. First one is, I can't hire a good enough people, right? Massive, massive limiting belief. I hear it all the time from folks in Whitewater. And the reason for that is not because those people they don't exist. They're a little bit hard to find, but it's no harder for you than it is for anybody else in any other market. Right? I hear it in every industry I work in. They all say the same thing. And while there is some truth to the fact that, yes, it's hard to find people, it's no harder than it is for anybody else. So the idea that you can't find people is not because they don't exist or because your industry is unique. It's because you haven't gained the skill. You just haven't gained the skill. You haven't learned to attract, to retain, and to lead leaders. Right? Especially if you're talking about executives. So that's a big one. I can't hire folks. Another one is that I'm giving it all I've got, and all I've got is not enough. And the reason for that is, one, that's true. And now it's also true of anybody else who would be in your role. No one person can actually do what you're expecting you to do. And so you have to replace you with us. Right? There's no one person who can do what I do, but we can. And when you build a strong executive team around you, you realize that nobody should have been responsible for all the things that you were responsible for. And once you spread out that load to a series of high caliber executives, and each one can again shine in their strengths, that's where that growth comes from. Another one is we just start to lose sight of the vision. Right? We get so down in the weeds again and again and again that the limiting belief becomes that vision was pie in the sky in the first place, or that it's dangerous to believe that, right? It's so hard and so far away that I just can't stand the disappointment. And the reality of it is you're closer to that vision than you've ever been. You're just more aware of what you have to do to get there. And so if you were willing to do it way back in the day, it's even easier now. And it's up to you to get that back, to find that vision again. And there's lots of different ways of doing that, but that's the one thing that you can't farm out to anybody else inside your organization.
And you mentioned this idea of we, so that would imply that there's a group of people here. And one thing that a lot of people online are kind of going on about is make sure you get the company culture right, make sure you got your vision right, all this kind of stuff. And company culture is something that I find to be a bit of a weird gray area in business. It's like, are you looking for people that think the way you think, or act the way you act, or dress the way you are, or look the way you are? Or are you looking for something separate to yourself that actually pushes the vision and mission of the company forward? So I wonder if you can talk to me about, as you scale, how to build company culture, because there's companies out there with tens of thousands of employees and all those people aren't the same people. Do you know what I mean? So how do we build and scale with company culture in mind?
Yeah, it's exactly right. So I want to make this practical because I feel like a lot of times culture can get really touchy-feely, ooey-gooey. We can say a lot of things, we can feel great, nothing changes. So I want to boil down to fundamentally the question that you're talking about is, what do we need our people to bring to the table? And in a small organization, you have to at least have a visionary, right? You have to have a vision for where you're going. Most founders are either visionaries or have a lot of visionary leadership style in them. And the other kind of ingredient to success is you got to have folks who get stuff done, right? And so when you look at the culture of these small organizations, the culture is basically have big ideas and go make them happen. Right? It's just and rinse and repeat. Just do it again and again. We're highly focused on revenue. We're focused on doing the right thing. We're focused on doing it fast. And so the culture is not anywhere nearly as much a function of some leadership retreat that we went on, as much as it is just the necessity of what it takes to survive in that stage. And so what happens though is that it's necessary to survive. And so when you start talking about things that poke on that, right? You start talking about adding systems and processes, or synergizing things, or slowing down decision making. These things are all, they're tantamount to sin, right? It's like, no, we don't do that. We go fast, we get it done. And so what happens is we try to solve the problems of that whitewater stage I was talking to you about with more of what worked in the past. Big ideas, go make it happen. And our cultures perpetuate that. And so if we keep trying to hire people who are like us when it's not working very well, it's just going to not work faster. And so what we have to do at this stage is we actually have to expand our culture to start including other types of leaders. Now, this has nothing to do with race, sex, gender, age. I'm not talking about any of that. What I'm talking about are the distinct wiring and skill sets that people bring to the table. Every single one of us has some combination of 4 leadership styles. We talked about visionaries. Operators are the folks who get stuff done. The other 2 tend to be pretty new for these small, ambitious organizations. And one of those is processors. And the challenge here is that processors don't look like us as visionaries and operators. They don't think like us. They default to no instead of yes. They focus on doing the thing right instead of doing the right thing. They like checklists and data and processes, and they are so unbearably slow that it drives us crazy. And so the very thing that we need to scale, to create that scalability that we want, is the very same thing that we've actively avoided for our entire history as an organization: too much system and process. And so when we're talking about culture, what we're really talking about is knowing what does the stage demand of you and how is your culture rubbing against that. And so when these organizations that are up and coming, they bump into the complexity and challenges of whitewater, when they start to recognize we don't just need systems and processes, we actually need to honor people who think in terms of system and process. That's a massive difference, right? Anyone can go out and download an SOP online. Anyone can get systems and processes. But if you don't actually fully embrace system and process, and usually that takes embracing the people who are great at creating them and abiding by them and upholding them, then your culture is going to limit you. It's going to stunt your growth. It's going to prevent you moving forward. So the answer to your question, I want you to use this as an example, is that our cultures have to change over time, right? They have to change over time, but they don't have to change every time, right? And so the trick is identifying what stage you're in, understanding what that stage requires of you, and expanding your culture and your expectations and your honor to include those styles so that you can succeed going into the future.
Mm. And what was that fourth type of leader? I picked up the first three, but I might have missed the fourth one. What's the fourth
You nailed
type?
it. I missed it. So it is the fourth style tends to come as a function of the inherent challenges between the other three. What do I mean by that? Most of us are born some combination of visionary, operator, and processor. However, if you stick a visionary, an operator, and a processor in a room, it's like sticking cats and dogs and squirrels together. It's just not a pretty picture, right? It's just, it devolves into chaos. And so what has to happen is the visionaries, operators, and processors need to learn to speak each other's language. They need to each learn to honor each other's style. They need to learn to synergize their vantage points. And so what happens is we actually learn the fourth style of leadership, which is called the synergist. There are some folks, there's a select few who are born with a synergist style, but for most of us, it's something that we have to learn as we go. And when we do, that synergist style is actually what unlocks the other three.
Mm. So that person kind of facilitates an environment for those people to kind of get things done, almost like a project manager of sorts, but for the upper levels of management type thing.
That's exactly right. So a project manager is a good picture of what it looks like. But here's the thing. We want to be careful to not personify the styles, right? Because there's a difference between a visionary and someone with a visionary style. There's a difference between a team that has a visionary and a team that has a visionary style, if that makes sense. And so when we personify the roles and say the visionary is the CEO, the operator is the COO, the processor is the CFO, and the synergist is the CHRO, that's fine. It helps to create some clarity, but it actually robs us of the understanding of how to get all four of those working together. Instead of having a synergist, we want to be synergistic. Instead of farming it out to somebody else, we want to develop the skill sets needed individually. And that's what creates the success that we want.
Mm. And we've been talking in terms of ideals right now, as in, if you do this, like that, it all goes perfect, it all goes well. But as you know, and as anybody who's in business knows, there are times of uncertainty and there are times where things are, what looks like on a downward trend. But if you're able to stay motivated and, weather the storm type thing, you'll be able to make it through. And so I'm wondering, what kind of advice do you give to your clients, or what kind of things did you do yourself to stay motivated in times where things weren't going so well or things were looking not so great?
Yeah. So there's never a stage where everything is great. Right? Like there's never a stage when everything is perfect. It doesn't exist. If someone is selling you something that says that, they're wrong, right? So even predictable success is not marked by the absence of failure. It doesn't magically make all of your customers wonderful. You don't get every hire perfect. What makes predictable success a predictable success is not that the problems go away. It's that we have the capacity to handle them. And so there's a few different things that go into that. One is you have to have vision. You have to have vision. If you don't have vision, your group, team, company is going to be brittle in the face of adversity. It is the vision for what can be that really sets us apart. And here's what that vision does, and does so remarkably well, is that it refocuses us not on what is the economy doing, but what do we have to do to achieve that vision. Because folks are very quick to jump on, oh, the economy's down, so things are going to suck. Or the economy's bad, so we can't expand. Or the economy's bad, so our company's going to go out of business. COVID was a really hard time for a lot of people, especially in the restaurant industry, right? A phenomenal amount of restaurants here in the United States closed their doors. But most restaurants didn't close their doors. And so those that closed their doors say, oh, it was because of COVID. That's why we had to shut our doors, right? But the reality of it is that would be true only if every restaurant closed, because every restaurant experienced the impact of COVID. But a lot of restaurants adapted, right? A lot of restaurants had the cash on hand to deal with it. A lot of restaurants had the agility and nimbleness to adapt. It's not about the market. The market can make it harder. The market can also make it easier. But fundamentally, predictable success is not about the market that you're in. It's about your ability to navigate the changes in that market sustainably over time. And that's where we get agency back. We have a vision, we're going after the vision, and we know we can't guarantee success, but we can give ourselves the highest probability of success, especially if we stay in it and do it again and again and again.
And all the things we've been talking about for the last half an hour plus is what you do at Scale Architects. So I'm wondering if you can kind of talk me through the process of who the person is that you're looking for that would sign up to be a client of Scale Architects, what they would get, and why they should consider being a client of Scale Architect.
Yeah, I work almost exclusively with founders who are leading entrepreneurial organizations that have had some success. The vast majority of them are 7 figures trying to get to 8 figures, or 8 figures trying to get to 9. And so these are founder-led organizations that are typically dealing with the complexity of the growth that's come alongside. So founders who are feeling that disillusionment, I don't know if I have what it takes. Founders who are wondering if they should hand it off to somebody else. Founders who maybe have done their time and are ready to transition to someone else, but want to see their company succeed even more after they're gone. Those are the types of folks that I'm working with. And what I help them do, I work with them and their leadership team, their executive team, to build a scalable organization. You can't just go out and achieve scale. You have to build a scalable organization. And that's what we do day in and day out.
And just to recap there, what does a scalable organization look like? Like if you had 3 bullet points of what that looked like, what does it look like?
So a couple of things. One, you have a high functioning and highly cohesive executive team. Can't do it without it, not sustainably. And for the founder, that means it's not all up to you. You don't have to make the big decisions alone. You don't have to put the company on your shoulders. You don't have to be the only one who has vision. You don't have to be the only one who inspires change inside the organization. So first off, you have a highly functioning, high capacity, cohesive executive team. Second thing is that you are able to pursue growth in both revenue and profitability simultaneously. Most other stages, you have to pick between one or the other. We can focus on our revenue, but it's going to come at the cost of our profitability. We can focus on profitability, but we're going to have to slow down revenue growth. In predictable success, you can achieve both sustainably. You can sustainably increase both your revenue and your profitability over time. The second factor here is that you have the ability to focus both on the current year's challenges and metrics and goals and success, and almost equally future years' success and goal, particularly at the executive team level. So we have a highly functioning executive team that are driving both profit growth and revenue growth, and are doing that by being able to spend the bulk of their energy focused on the future and creating future growth because they know they have the infrastructure to support this year's goals.
Yeah. And Scott, something that you will have a unique view on because you've worked with so many different entrepreneurs and different types of entrepreneurs, but you kind of have this overview of everything. What do you see the future of entrepreneurship looking like? Obviously, we're very tech focused at the moment, very software focused, but for someone like yourself, you might see trends popping up here and there where we might be going back to products, we might be going back to bricks and mortar. But I'm wondering, for someone like you who interacts with so many different entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis, what are the future trends that you see?
Yeah, I think so much of history is a repetition of what was, right? In a sense, there's nothing new under the sun. It's going to be the same thing. You're going to have visionary founders who go out and make stuff happening. I think the fundamental changes in the expression of that are largely to do with technology. We're becoming an increasingly virtual society, right? Which means that online experiences are going to be a dramatic increase. AI is obviously dramatically shaping both the world of what we need humans to do and what we're capable of. And so I think you'll see in many ways a continuation of what we have now, where tech enabled founders are able to scale much more effectively and much faster and to a much greater extent than they were beforehand. And so most industries that I see, the top is getting bigger and the very bottom is getting bigger, and the gap between the two is getting harder and harder to overcome. AI will enable you, the big guys, to make massive companies that rival countries. AI will also enable the small-time founder who just wants to have a solopreneurship to do that without having to hire a whole team. The challenge is that gap in the middle, right? And again, that's what founders are going to have to be cognizant of, is you can have early success, you can also create a massive success, but how will you navigate the space between? Technology alone cannot solve that. You have to learn to navigate these stages as an organization.
And speaking about learning, you did some early learning from a podcast. And so I'm wondering for you, where do you do most of your learning? Is it mostly books? Is it podcasts? And if so, where, what shows, what books have stood out to you over the years?
Yeah. We've got another 4 hours, right? No, I'm just kidding. I love audiobooks, and podcasts. Those are two of my favorites. And, quite frankly, and I think you'll be able to attest to this as well, one of my top learning opportunities is my podcast, having guests on. And what I love about that is I get to ask the questions. If you've ever read a book and be like, man, I wish I could ask this question. And it's like, you may actually be able to get to the author, but you don't think you can, so you never even try. You get to talk to authors face to face, day in and day out. And so that it's not why I started the show. It's called The Secrets of the High Demand Coach. The reason I started the show was because there's a lot of really bad coaches out there. Not bad people, right? But they're either poorly trained, they're saying yes to things that they shouldn't say yes to. It doesn't matter what the reason is. One of the things that I've found for entrepreneurs is that the vast majority of entrepreneurs have actually tried coaching. It's not that they haven't tried, but they've had a bad experience with it. I lost more money personally on the advice of coaches than I ever did on any of my own decisions that I made without a coach. One coach alone cost me about $800,000 one year. And I own that. I hired the wrong coach. I did what they told me to do, even though I knew it was wrong. I made that decision. They didn't. But when that fell apart, it left me feeling completely isolated, because if I can't hire a coach who can do this, point me in the right direction or do this better than I can, then how am I going to get the answers that I need? So I started the podcast. It's called The Secrets of the High Demand Coach. And we bring on some of the best coaches around the world, and only the best coaches, because I want folks to, one, be able to learn from their advice, but two, see what a great coach looks like. So when the time comes for you to go out and find a coach, you've got a history of knowing what great coaches look like, and your probability of finding the right coach goes up significantly.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, all the influx of guests I had were coaches. And over time, I started to learn what a good coach looks like and also what a bad coach looks like. And obviously, this podcast isn't about coaching, it's about entrepreneurship. But you're 100% right there that there are a lot of bad coaches out there. Luckily, none of the bad coaches have been aired on my show, but plenty of conversations have been had with them. I'm like, damn, you're just selling a program here. You're not selling a solution. And I think a good coach sells a solution, as well as also is able to kind of pick the right clients. You know what I mean? They're picking the right person to work with them because they know what will work for them, or they know how to guide them in the right direction. And that is something that is, invaluable. So you're 100% right there. Having your own podcast or having dedicated time to speak to other people in your field maybe, or other people that are entrepreneurial, that's the best learning you can do, because I find that book learning is good for like philosophical ideas or like mentality kind of training things, or if you like reading fiction, obviously it's good for entertainment. But the real way to get lessons and learnings is by doing, or by speaking to someone who is doing the thing that you are, which is fantastic. So I'm glad that you said that. And something else I want to ask you about is kind of, you seem like the kind of person who wants to have a legacy, wants to leave a lasting impact on the world. What does that look like for you with Scale Architects and, yourself as a personal brand? What does your long lasting impact on the world look like, Scott?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So one of the things that I lay out in my book is this progression that founders go on. And the very last, especially 2 stages, are highly defined by the pursuit of legacy, right? Not that it doesn't exist beforehand, but what happens when you reach those stages is you're kind of left with a choice. Are you going to get back in the game? Are you going to go start this again? I mean, I sold my business in my mid-30s. It's like I got a lot of life yet left. It's like I'm not that great a golfer. That's not going to work for me. And so fundamentally, I decided a couple of things. One, I was going to get back into the game. I wanted to get in. I was going to build a coaching consulting business. And two, I wanted to give the best years of my life to someone else's success. My success now is not defined by my coaching revenue, right? It's a necessary part of the process. That's great. My success is defined by the change that I create in my clients, both lives and companies. And so for me, legacy is that. I want to have a meaningful impact in the lives of my clients and those who work for them, right? The employees of my clients. And the second piece, a very wise man once told me that your legacy is how you make people feel and what you write down. And so that was a big part of what led me to write my first book. It's called The Founder's Evolution. Again, we've talked about it here over the course of this, but it just released last year, and it's been really exciting to see that out in the wild world.
Lovely stuff. And Scott, last question I'm going to ask you, which is a question I ask every single guest, but the answer is always different, and it's one that's personal to you. What is it about what you do that brings you the most joy?
It's that I was there. I mean, I was in their shoes. I know what it feels like to try and lead a team and not have any idea where you're leading them. And so those moments that the light bulb goes off when I'm in the session room with a client and I see 2 people make a connection that they hadn't made before, or I see something unlock for someone, you can see it in their eyes. And I mean, that is the fuel that drives me, is that moment of revelation and inspiration that then leads to the transformation they've wanted all along.
Where can the people find you online?
So I wish it was as simple as saying, go search for Scott Ritzheimer, but there's a couple of problems with that. 1, no one can spell Ritzheimer, and 2, I'm a junior. So if you search for Scott Ritzheimer, you're gonna get 2 of us, and you're gonna have to pick one. So if you do, pick the one who looks like he's 14, you'll find me. But no, if you head to scalearchitects.com, that's the best resource. All our social media links are on there. You can follow us on your favorite platform. We also have a number of free assessments, and you can get a free copy of my book by clicking free book up at the top of the page. So again, scalearchitects.com. plural.com.
Thank you for listening to People Explained. New episodes come out every Monday. We would appreciate it if you gave us a review on Apple Podcasts and shared this episode with a friend.